Do you have something to say?
Dystopian literature is rather hit or miss with me, but when it hits, it can hit quite nicely. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the dystopian books that landed especially well with me, and I'm going to present them in the form of a dystopian pyramid. So thank you for clicking on this video. You can help other book lovers find this content by helping out the algorithm and hitting the like button. You can help out this channel by subscribing if you haven't already. Your support is greatly appreciated. We'll skip the intro sequence and jump right in. First, a few books that do not appear on the dystopian pyramid for a variety of reasons. Firstly, A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. I think this book is a masterpiece. It's one of my favorite books of all time. I do see it appear on various lists of best dystopian works. However, I mean, there are elements of dystopian literature in this book. There is the Ludovician technique, where the state operates or performs an operation on criminals to suppress their dangerous or their violent impulses, which is a dystopian practice. However, later in the book, the citizenry, they decide that they do not approve of this treatment, so they protest it and the treatment is repealed and the government stops doing it. So that's this kind of political process and the government listening to the wishes of the people. That's kind of antithetical to a dystopia. So I think that pretty much disqualifies this book as a dystopian book, but it is a masterpiece. However, it is not what I would consider a true dystopian book, so it does not figure on the dystopian pyramid. Also not figuring on the dystopian pyramid are The Stepford Wives by Ira Levin, Dark Harvest by Norman Partridge, and Lord of the Flies. Because while these books are set in a dystopian community, be it a small town or a suburb or an island, for me, a dystopian book really I need the government to be more widespread in its dystopian control of the population. I need at least an entire nation to be under the control of a totalitarian government. So these are all excellent books, but again, I don't feel they exactly qualify as dystopian. And also not on the dystopian pyramid is a book by a British novelist of Japanese descent. And I'm not even going to tell you the title. I think it is an excellent book and it is a dystopian book. However, I feel that simply revealing the genre would be a spoiler. So if if you're familiar with the book, you probably know which one I'm talking about. I think it's excellent. It's deserving of a place on the dystopian pyramid, but I don't want to spoil it for anyone who has not read it yet. So let's take a look at the dystopian pyramid. And before we reveal the bottom row, I would like to point out that the dystopian pyramid consists of hundreds and thousands of books, but we are only interested in the top part of the pyramid. So I'm going to refer to the first row of books we look at as the bottom row, but bear in mind this is the bottom of the top. So these are all great books that I'm going to talk about in this video. And we can go ahead and reveal the bottom row. We have Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Basterica from 2017. This book is set in Argentina, where humans are farmed for their meat. Now, Argentina is well known for producing high quality meat. I mean, Argentinian beef is pretty much the gold standard for beef in the world. However, this book takes that concept to in a very different direction. Our protagonist and narrator, he is the head of a processing facility where humans who are bred for their meat, they are shipped in. They are then to this facility. They are fattened, cleaned, shaved, slaughtered, and then packaged and shipped off to retail outlets, supermarkets and restaurants and that sort of thing. This was a viewer recommendation I'm very grateful for because I really liked this book. It was not as disturbing as I was expecting it to be, basically because the premise was so unbelievable. It was too unbelievable to really disturb me, but it was still a very enjoyable and thought-provoking read. There is one scene in particular that really stuck with me. Our protagonist, he needs to hire new people for the processing facility. So he is showing two potential employees, he's showing them around the facility. And one of these prospective employees, he doesn't let it show, but he is nauseated by what he sees. And he wants the job because he needs the job. And apparently working at this processing facility, it pays quite well. The other applicant, he doesn't let it show, but he is really into it. He wants the job because he thinks it will be a good time. Like, he's really into what's going on there. So this makes our protagonist very nervous. He does not hire people like that. An interesting book, well written, well paced. It's a smooth read. It does not figure higher on this dystopian pyramid, probably because it makes an attempt to explain to us how society devolved into this cannibalistic hellscape, which I think does a disservice to the story. When a dystopian book tries to explain how society devolved into this dystopian state, it is a good way to date the book. And it often comes across as unbelievable and even preachy at times. Whereas when a dystopian book makes no effort or gives no explanation as to what caused this devolution into a dystopia, that allows the reader to bring their own social and political context and the social and political movements that they are wary of. It allows them to bring those into the book. It allows them to use their imagination. It becomes more timely and more personal to the reader. In Tender is the Flesh, they make an attempt to explain this transition, and I don't think it works. But I'm nitpicking. It's still a really good book. In this row, we also have Prophet Song by Paul Lynch from 2023, winner of the Booker Prize of 2023. I went into this book blind. It won the Booker Prize, and I read it simply for that reason. I had no idea what it was about. I didn't know what genre it was. And this book is set in Ireland. So immediately I was excited because I always love spending time in Ireland. And then after a few dozen or so pages, it became clear to me that this was a dystopian book, and I was puzzled because a dystopian book is a strange choice for a Booker Prize winner, right? I found that Ireland was a strange setting for a dystopian novel. When I think of Ireland, I don't think of dystopia. Now, we all bring our own personal biases to a book. And me, I happen to suffer from a pro-Ireland bias. I love the country. I always have a great time when I'm there. So I did not get the Ireland experience because it didn't really feel like I was spending time in Ireland. But I still ended up enjoying the book. It's written in almost a stream of consciousness kind of style. But it works really well for the story. It has a good flow. The story moves at a good pace, and it's a smooth read. Our protagonist is the matriarch of a family. She has a husband and 3 children. And one day her husband, who is the head of a union, the head of the teachers union, I believe, one day he is arrested and he has disappeared. And so in leaving our protagonist to deal with her 3 children on her own, as the weeks go by, more and more people that she knows get arrested and get disappeared. And the situation gets so bad that eventually she has to try and flee the country. But the government refuses to renew one of her kids' passports. So she has to flee the country, essentially with an undocumented child. This book was written at the outset of the Syrian refugee crisis. So what the author was trying to do, I believe, is trying to give Europeans or Western readers, trying to give them a better perspective on what it's like to be a refugee, which is why I think it won the Booker Prize, because politics often plays a role in what books get nominated and what books win this prize, and other prizes as well. However, this book does a very good job of achieving its goals, I think. By following the central character, we see how she is placed in a desperate situation, not at all of her doing. She is desperate and vulnerable, and we see these characters who not that long ago, they had dignity and they had agency, they had hope for the future. And we see that because of political forces beyond their control, they are put at the mercy of others, and they are put at the mercy of the people that they encounter. This book does pull its punches, which I, for one, am grateful for. With these people in these desperate and vulnerable situations, there are those around them who seek to take advantage of their desperation, and there are those around them who view them as less than human. This book could have gone to some very dark places, and believably so, but I'm glad that it didn't. It paints a vivid enough picture so that we understand what these characters, what these refugees, the kinds of things that they could likely experience. So it is effective without being too unpleasant. Also on this row, we have a book that does not pull its punches, The Acolyte by Nick Cutter from 2015. The Acolyte is set in a Christian fundamentalist theocracy. Now, when I first started reading this book, I was a bit skeptical, because Christian fundamentalism, that's kind of low-hanging fruit. It's a bit of an easy target, and I've seen it done dozens and dozens of times, so I was a bit skeptical, but as I kept reading, this book takes that premise and it gives us a very different, unique perspective on it, and it takes it to places I had not seen before. Our protagonist is an acolyte, which is a moral police officer, basically a thug with a badge. I apologize for the redundancy. And in this world, the city is experiencing attacks from domestic terrorists. So our protagonist, the acolyte, he needs to investigate these attacks and prevent further attacks, and catch and stop those responsible for them. So even though we are in a dystopian novel, a black and white world, this book gives us an interesting perspective on it. We have a central character who is in conflict with himself, in conflict with his beliefs, in conflict with the government and society at large. There are a few scenes in this book, as you should expect from a Nick Cutter book, a few scenes that are quite disturbing. Your writing is quite descriptive. There's some passages that are squeamish in the queen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. My goodness, yes.
Yeah. I mean, even some horror books will, drag a reader through the mud, but then, pick them up over the last 50 pages and set them gently on shore and dust them off and, send them on their way. And I think a lot of readers appreciate that. I think my tactic is to drag them through the mud and then step on their head.
There's a scene involving a blind ex-minister. There's also a scene that involves a pregnancy termination machine and some improvisation that goes on with this device. Nick Cutter is not known for pulling his punches. He does not pull his punches in this book, but it's still a very entertaining, if not disturbing, reading experience, and one that I highly recommend. The second top row, we can reveal the books now. We have The Trial by Franz Kafka, a literary classic wherein our central character, Joseph K., he is arrested, yet he cannot seem to find out what he is being accused of. However, everything he does is perceived as making him appear even more guilty, and he does not understand what he is doing to provoke this response. He does not even understand what he is being accused of. There are hundreds of interpretations of what this book is about, what it is trying to say. I prescribe to the theory that Franz Kafka in this book is making a statement about anti-Semitism. Our central character is told he's done something wrong, and everything he does makes people mistrust him, and he doesn't understand because he's done nothing to earn the people's mistrust. He's done nothing to feel guilty about, yet he's told that he is guilty and there's nothing he can do about it, which is, I think, an excellent metaphor of what anti-Semitism, of what Jewish people experience in many cultures. They're born Jewish, and people mistrust everything they do, yet they've done nothing wrong, and yet they're accused of being mistrustful and being guilty. It's a powerful metaphor, but just one of many interpretations you could give this book, and it serves as an excellent example of what dystopian literature can do, especially if the book does not give explanations of how the society devolved into this dystopian state. Then the reader is free to interpret it in however they want and bring their own context into the story. And that's one of the strengths of dystopian literature, and I think The Trial is an excellent example of that. Also in this row, we have a dystopian book that is not a classic, but I feel should be, and that is The Wanting Seed by Anthony Burgess from 1962. This is Anthony Burgess's 10th novel, published only a few months after his seminal A Clockwork Orange. And in The Wanting Seed, while it is poignant and thought-provoking, it is also an excellent example of the humorous side of Anthony Burgess's writing. The story is set in a future London that suffers from overpopulation to such an extent that the government encourages homosexuality. In fact, the government engages in propaganda to make homosexuality almost a civic duty. It's seen as virtuous, whereas heterosexuality is seen as selfish, dangerous, even treasonous. The government tries to control the population by mandating who can have children and who can't. However, this is very difficult to enforce, so the government relies on indoctrination and getting the citizenry to police themselves. The story centers around a married couple, a man and a woman, and they are both civil servants, and one day the woman decides, I would like to have a child, which creates conflict in the marriage because the husband, he is up for a promotion at work, and if his wife has a child, if his wife gets pregnant, this will be seen as anti-civic, and he will definitely not get the promotion then. And not to mention that his wife will probably lose her job because of this anti-civic, selfish behavior. However, she wants to have a child, and the story centers around this conflict. As a consequence of overpopulation, there are food distribution issues. So this book also has cannibalistic gangs, and they, like the government, they engage in propaganda to convince themselves that what they are doing is good, what they are doing is for the betterment of society. They eat humans, but they are not savages. First, they put the meat in tins because they eat what they can and they can what they eat. It's a funny book, it's thought-provoking, and still over 60 years after its publication, it's still relevant in the way that it treats propaganda, self-censorship, and society, the government and society's efforts to control women's reproductive systems. It's still a relevant and poignant read. And I love Anthony Burgess's writing, and The Wanting Seed is one of my favorites from his catalog. And finally, resting at the very top of the dystopian pyramid, it should come as no surprise, is 1984 by George Orwell, published in 1949. the gold standard for dystopian literature. I read this book as a teenager and I was very impressed. We are all familiar with the old adage, those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. But what if you want history to be repeated? What if you want to impede progress? Well, then you simply get the population to ignore history. You control information and adjust it to suit your agenda. So in 1984, our protagonist, he works for the Ministry of Information, and he is tasked with going through documents and redacting them or adjusting them to fit the state's current agenda. For example, we used to be at war with Eurasia, but we are now at war with East Asia. So he goes through the documents to reflect this new agenda by stating that we have always been at war with Eurasia, which is one of my favorite lines in all of literature. It's over the top, it's simple, and it says so much. We have always been at war with Eurasia. This book also deals heavily with sex, which is important. Dictating and mandating what people do with their sexual urges. This is a very important part of control. All the great world religions, even the not so great ones, they are all obsessed with people's sex lives, which makes sense. Sex and sexual urges, they can be frightening. They compel us to do things we otherwise wouldn't do. They make us vulnerable. It puts us in awkward situations. We don't really know how to go about satisfying these urges. We don't really always know how to go about repressing them either, or even if we should repress them. So when a higher power comes along, whether it's the state, whether it's God, and they tell us exactly what we should do with these urges, that it relieves us of a certain burden. Oh, thank you for telling me what to do with my sexual urges, because I was frustrated by them and I don't understand them. I don't understand sexual relations. That's awkward and it's frustrating. It's complicated. So thank you for telling me exactly what to do with them. Right? This is the idea, and it's very effective. It's a very effective way to gain control over someone, gain control over a population as well. How many actions can be both a punishment and a reward? That can be both something that you run after with all your force or you run away from with all your force. So sex and sexual urges are confusing and an excellent way to control people. Plus, sexual frustration can be harnessed and turned into an aggression that can be used for the state's good. It can be used for war efforts or even labor efforts. In 1984, the physical expression of love, which sex can sometimes be, this is perceived as in conflict or in competition with love and devotion that a follower should have for the state, a follower should have for the leader. People who engage in sex or non-state sanctioned sex, they are perceived as rebellious or insurgents even. So when the protagonist engages in sex with the woman he loves, he sees this as a political act. Furthermore, when he becomes further disillusioned with the state, he begins to view virginal qualities in others. He begins to despise these qualities. It's a fascinating read. It's not an easy read. This is a dense book from what I remember, but it's fascinating and a classic, and well deservedly so. Have you had any experience with the books in the Dystopian Pyramid? What is it you love about dystopian literature? What dystopian books can you recommend? I always love connecting with you in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. I'll see you at the next video.